effects of nicotine vapor exposure. So I guess just by way of background, like obviously everyone knows that there's a lot of people vaping today. Vaping is different from smoking. You're ingesting, we're talking about nicotine here, but I guess the basic difference is combustion, right? With smoking, you're lighting something on fire. We know that combustion produces a lot of the nasty stuff that we associate with like cigarette smoke. So it's making a lot of the carcinogens and stuff that is in smoke. So vapor is a lower temperature that produces vapor as opposed to smoke. There's no combustion. So in theory, you're getting the nicotine in this case. In theory, you're getting less of the nasty combustion byproducts. But of course, vaping is a new thing, and we don't really know what the long-term effects are in humans or anything. Can you just talk a little bit about how you study this in rodents and what the setup looks like?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that I really think we have a very good model for. So unlike the alcohol inhalation, we have a very similar chamber setup for vapor inhalation, and this is very similar to how humans vape. We literally have tanks that can be bought in smoke shops that affix to boxes that'll heat these coils at high wattage and then vaporize this nicotine.
So
And
you're
then,
giving them the flavored vapor as a human would buy it.
yes, yeah, I mean you can do absolutely all the same things, and well, fortunately or unfortunately, you can cram a lot more nicotine into that vaping model because tobacco has the upper limit. I mean, the tobacco has the upper limit of how much you can fit into a tobacco product.
Yeah,
And
there's
the
only so much
tobacco,
plant material you can pack into one cigarette.
yeah, and they worked for a long time to increase the nicotine content because they were aware that that was actually what was driving increased use and consumption. And so they would have loved to have higher and higher. The vaping companies can go much higher. They don't all, it's worth noting,
Hmm.
but like Juul, for example, has like 60 mgs per kg. It's a quite high level of nicotine. So from a single puff
Yeah.
of a cigarette, like a Juul, you're getting a lot more nicotine. And inhalation is a really effective way of getting things to the brain. It has a very, very fast drug on rate because it crosses that lipid barrier and gets right to those brain regions of interest. And that's part of why something like nicotine is known to be so addictive. And vaping has that same problem. So this is where I actually think the vaping work is really fascinating to me because one of the reasons I started looking into it was I noticed the statistics for while vaping is helping people who were smoking not smoke, which makes sense because it's nicotine replacement.
Hmm.
So people were finding it a very easy time transitioning from tobacco products to vaping, but vaping is still delivering nicotine, and that nicotine is still acting in your brain to increase your consumption, increase your use, increase your dependency, increase feelings of withdrawal in the absence of it. And what happens is, as you were getting that positive message of vaping is saving smokers,
Hmm.
young people are hearing that and they're thinking that vaping is now suddenly safer for some reason. And
Hmm.
the link between tobacco products and cancer has been well described. So when people start smoking now, most of them do it with the knowledge of a cancer risk. Vaping doesn't have that cancer risk, but it has the exact same and maybe worse risk of dependency.
Hmm.
Um,
Just
and you're
based on
not
the concentration of nicotine.
Yeah, yeah. So I've actually, and the statistics on this are horrifying because you have 12-year-olds, you have 13-year-olds, you have very young people who've never smoked a cigarette and maybe wouldn't because they have an awareness of the cancer risk.
Hmm.
Now really engaging with vaping and going into a lifetime of nicotine dependence from vaping
Hmm.
alone.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is your area of study or something that you looked at in your experiments with nicotine vapor, but with these nicotine vape products, they often have artificial flavoring added to them, and I would guess that we don't know that that's like an X factor. We don't really know the effects of those things, or do we?
Well, yes and no. So there's some beautiful work from Brandon Henderson, who's looked at some green apple components. And he found that mice will self-administer nicotine vapor, and they will self-administer more nicotine vapor when it's paired with a green apple flavorant, which is it's a chemical. So
Hmm.
not the nicotine. They'll also self-administer just the green apple flavor.
Mm.
So some of those chemicals will engage the reward circuitry in the same way as nicotine and exacerbate the effects of nicotine.
I see. So the reinforcing effect. I mean, perhaps unsurprisingly, they're probably more reinforcing when you add nicotine plus tasty flavor than just nicotine on its own.
Yeah, and fortunately, this is actually a place where I think that there's been good progress because the research has shown this. You've seen a lot of federal regulation of flavors because those are risky. They're riskier for younger populations. So you're seeing some of those banned. Unfortunately, it's a moving target because you ban one chemical, you can make another. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this is
Mm-hmm.
very Wild West. And this is, I think they've attempted regulations on vape, and there's been litigation against Juul. But they're able to sort of adapt and move on because this technology is ever evolving.
Mm-hmm. And so, in your studies, what did you guys look at in terms of like what brain regions you were looking at, or the behavior? Were you looking at the addictive potential of vaporized nicotine? Were you looking for something else?
So we started off really simply. We wanted to look and see what is nicotine doing to some of these same relevant brain regions.
Mm-hmm.
And we did find that, for example, a region like the central amygdala is significantly activated after one exposure. So we would put our mice in the chambers for 3 hours. They would get relevant serum nicotine levels similar to humans, even higher than humans, and you would see these central amygdala neurons light up. They would increase their activity in a slice electrophysiology model and in an immunohistochemical marker of activity.
Mm-hmm. And is this like are the
Interestingly,
mice, are they just in a chamber where then you just pump in the vapor? So
yeah.
do they initially respond to it in an aversive way, or do they initially like it?
Well, so this is a complicated question. We tried to look and see if they thought it was aversive, if they would avoid it, and we didn't see the avoidance globally. I can't say that they will. No, I can say they will also nose poke and trigger for it to come. So that suggests some wanting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's liking or novelty seeking or what it is. But yeah, they don't avoid it. They won't run from it. They don't have a significant stress response to it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Okay.
But they will. It is interesting though, because the neuroplasticity does come into play. We found that the central amygdala was activated with a single exposure. When we did 5 days of repeated exposure, that activity was gone.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at the central amygdala after one time, lit up. After 5 times, 5 days in a row, no more increase in activity. And so I do think that that's a good example of, like alcohol, like other drugs, you're changing the reactivity of a system that is designed to be able to react. And in that change could be some neurobiological substrate pathology.
Mm-hmm. And with nicotine exposure, do you see sex differences or individual differences similar to what you see with other paradigms?
Yes, we haven't done as much of the advanced behavioral work with the sexes. We've kept it a little bit more slice physiological, but we do see differences in changes in the CRF1, that stress receptor system in the ventral tegmental area, which is a mesolimbic reward site.
Mm-hmm.
And we do see differences where females are more sensitive than males.
And what is the direction of that effect? Like, does nicotine have like an anxiolytic effect?
So that's
Is it
that's a
obvious? Yeah.
it's a good question. Nicotine is canonically known to be sort of like anxiety relieving. This is one reason why females in particular will report engaging with nicotine, is that they would like to decrease their anxiety levels. And we do see some of that in rodents, but it shifts. So this is where I think with the plasticity in neuronal circuitry, you also have plasticity in behavior. So I think acutely, it can be very anxiolytic. I think chronically, by that sort of rewiring of the system, you get dependence that looks like anxiety in the absence of the drug.
Mm-hmm.
But you get this anxiolytic phenotype or anxiogenic phenotype with chronic exposure that maybe is in counter to the anxiolytic phenotype of acute exposure, but is certainly part of the pathology.